Hello world, welcome to my first ever YouTube tutorial. I am going to try and make these ADHD friendly, so I'm going to launch straight into the content. I'll give a very quick walkthrough of what we're doing, and then I'll go back and take a little more time explaining the concepts. Basically the purpose of this one is to teach you how to animate components in React Native. So I've just got some boilerplate code in a basic Expo application here. We've got a container with 3 components inside, which you can see over here on the right. This black rectangle is going to be the one that we're animating. These buttons just do basically what they say. One will run the animation, the other will reset it. Basic styling, basic imports from React Native, and then up here is kind of an overview of the process that we can refer to. So, step 1, import animated library and use ref hook. As you can imagine, the animated library will come in handy when animating. We're going to import that from React Native, and we're also going to import the use ref hook from React. There you go, step 1. Step 2, create animation value. Now this is a fancy looking line of code, but I promise you it's really not that complicated. I'm going to create a variable called animation value, set it equal to the current property of a useRef hook, and inside of that useRef hook I'm going to say animated.value 0. There we go, that is step 2 complete. Step 3, create animation driver. I'm going to say const animate box, again equal to a useRef hook. Animate box just because that's what we're doing, but again you can call it whatever you want. To value, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to say animated.timing using that animated library that we imported. I'm going to plug in the animation value, say to value of 1. We're starting at 0, we're going to 1. Duration of 2000 milliseconds or 2 seconds, use native driver false, and I'll explain what that means later. And I'm going to go down here and say .current. Okay, I'll give you a second to look at that if you need. We're up to step 4, link animation value to styling. So what we're going to do is we're going to expand this box. We're going to take it from a height of 10% to 20%. So I'm going to get rid of the hard-coded 10%, and I'm going to say animation value dot interpolate. Open it up. We need an input range and an output range. The input range is going to be 0 to 1. The output range is going to be 10%, our starting value, and 20%. And that's done. But now when I hit save, there's going to be a big angry red screen. It's going to say nothing that I can really understand, but I know the problem. The problem is that we haven't turned this into an animated.view. We can't just animate a normal view. We have to make it a special animated view in order for this to work. And then we've got another error saying attempted to assign to read-only property, and that's because we've got all this fancy stuff, but we're not actually doing anything with it. So I'm going to go down here and create an onPress event and say animate box.start. So that's triggering the animation when we hit the run button. And then on the other button, I'm going to say animate box.reset. And I'm also going to say animation value dot set value 0. And now if I've done everything correctly, I should be able to hit run. It should expand the box, and when I hit reset, it should reset it to its original format. And we can do a little bit more though, just to demonstrate the concept a little bit further. We can animate the background color as well, again going animation value.interpolate. Open that up. We're doing input range and output range again, but this time we're going to have 3 values. We're going to have 0, 0.5, and 1. Output range of, what are we doing, background color? We're going to say black. We're going to transition through gray, and we're going to end up at white. Now if I go down here, hit save, and hit run, not only is it expanding, but it's changing color. And when we hit reset, it goes back to its original setting. So that's pretty much the basic concepts at play. Hopefully that's a nice, concise walkthrough. Now I'm going to take a little bit more time to unpack what we've just done and explain how we did it. So now I'm going to walk through it again, but this time I'm going to take it a little slower and try and explain why we've just done what we've done. Before I go into it step by step, just a brief overview. As you've probably just seen, the idea of animation when you're using React Native is you initialize a value, in our case we've done 0, and you increase that value over a specific period of time to a different value. So in our case we've gone from 0 to 1 over the course of 2 seconds. Because that value is linked to our styling, we can say that 0 equals something, in our case a height of 10%, and 1 equals something else, in this case a height of 20%. And so over the course of 2 seconds, as that number goes from 0 to 1, the styling goes from 10% to 20%. So you can imagine that after 1 second it's at 0.5, and at that point the height is 15%. So everything is kind of synchronized. The styling is synchronized with the number, and all of that's being driven by the animation driver. I will just say as well, animation driver, I'm not sure if that's the technical name for it, that's just what I call it. You could call it an engine. You could call it a function, although it's not technically a function, I don't suppose. But yeah, that's the overview of what we're doing. And now, hopefully this will help you grasp the concept even further. So we're importing the animated library in useRefHook. The animated library is really, really powerful. Obviously, it comes bundled with React Native. I encourage you to check out the docs because they're really, really informative. You can play around with that, and there's actually quite a lot of flexibility within this library. The reason we need the useRefHook is because if we were to just initialize, for example, so we're down here with animation value. If I just done const animation value equals 0, that wouldn't work. And the reason is when we're declaring a variable like that, that variable is going to be reinitialized every time the application re-renders. So basically, there's no point synchronizing an animation to a value which is constantly resetting to 0 every time something happens. Hence why we need to use the useRefHook. And when you're using a useRefHook, the object that is produced by this hook has a property of current, and that's the actual value that we're setting the variable equal to. I know it's a little bit complicated, but if you've worked with hooks before, you'd be familiar with this. And if not, you really don't need to overthink it. Basically, what we're doing is initializing this variable at a value of 0. And then this bit here, the new animated.value 0, that's just because we can't use any old value. I think the reason for that is because it's going... if this was just a normal value and we were just incrementing it every millisecond, then it would probably just cause the application to crash or just freeze up. So we need to have this special value which is designed to be integrated with the user interface. I'm guessing that's the reason behind it. It's one of those things where I don't actually know, but that's kind of a common sense explanation. In any case, so that's what we're doing in step 2. Step 3, we're creating an animation driver, and this just explains the logic of what we're doing. So we're taking that animation value, which we've initialized at 0, we're sending it to a value of 1, and we're getting there after 2000 milliseconds or 2 seconds. That's relatively self-explanatory, I suppose. The useNative driver, this is something I'm admittedly not totally sure of either. My understanding of it is if you set useNative driver to true, that disengages the driver from the UI thread, and it just helps, like if you're running complicated animations and you've got a lot of different components being animated at the same time, that's going to make for a more seamless UI experience. That's my understanding. For simple test cases like this, you can set it to false. A lot of the time I set it to false, but it's just a matter of experimentation. Maybe someone who's a bit more knowledgeable than me can come along and give a more detailed explanation of that. So anyway, after the first 3 steps, we've imported what we need, we've got the value, we've plugged the value into this driver. Then in step 4, we link the animation value to styling. Now, this might make a little more intuitive sense. So as I explained before, we've got an input range of 0 to 1. So it's starting at 0, it's ending at 1. The output range, 10%, 20%. So you can kind of imagine a progress bar, sort of moving across from 0 to 1, from 10 to 20. That's effectively what's going on here. And then the same thing with the background color. Except in this instance, we've got 3 values, so 0, 0.5, and 1, and black, gray, and white. Now we could, if we wanted to, we could say black, blue, and white. And in that case, I've got to reset it. There we go. And now it's going black to blue to white. Sorry about that little moment of confusion. So yeah, and it doesn't have to be, like, height and background color are just 2 examples that I've used. But you could do, what could you do? Let's think of, without making it too complicated. Well, I mean, let's do the width as well. Let's say animation value. I mean, you probably get it by this point, but I've started doing it, so I'll finish doing it. Input range, 0. And let's be a little bit tricky. Let's say 0, 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, and 1. And output range, what did we start at? We started at 50%, was it? 50%. Let's go from 50% to 70%. These are just random numbers. Down to 30%, and it's probably going to look a little bit weird. Down to 10%, and then back to 50%. I have no idea what this is going to look like, but let's reset it. There we go. That was a roller coaster ride. But yeah, so these I'm just doing this to demonstrate the concepts. But the best way to learn, honestly, is to just make your own little mock application like this and just play around with it. You can have a lot of fun. Actually, you can amuse yourself for hours, animating all sorts of different styling parameters. And then step 5. This is something which does need to be explained. So animate box.start. The reason we can do that is because we've contained this driver inside of a useRef hook. And I do this as a matter, it just makes for very clean coding. But because we've got the current property of that useRef hook within which is this driver, then we can just say animate box.start. There are other ways of doing it. We could, again, just to demonstrate, let's pretend this doesn't exist. Let's comment that out and go animated timing, cut that right out of there and paste it down here. So now we're not referring to the variable which contains the hook. We're actually just running the driver itself manually. We can do that as well, and it will do exactly the same thing. The only difference is we now need to put start at the end of that. And I believe that if we now hit run, there you go. So I contain it within that variable using the useRef hook just because it's a good way to format things, but it's not necessary. You can just do it like this if you want. And then down here, now I've confused you a little bit because now it doesn't recognize animate box anymore. Hey guys, sorry about that. I started to confuse myself a little bit, so I've backspaced, gone back in time to when animate box did exist, put the driver back inside of it and taken it out of there. That last little bit was just to demonstrate a concept, but the rest of the explanation will make a lot more sense if we just keep this in place. So animate box.reset and animation value.setValue, what does that do? Basically, when you run the animation, the value will go from 0 to 1 and it will stay at 1. It doesn't automatically reset to 0. So if we want to run the same animation multiple times, we need to get that number back to 0. Now, we don't technically need to do animate box.reset. We can just do that and run the animation and reset it. And it will serve exactly the same purpose. The reason I put animate box.reset in there is because sometimes you can also pause animations midway through, and I haven't demonstrated that in this tutorial, but I'm probably going to do another one after this where we talk about loops and stopping and starting and that kind of stuff. But suffice it to say, animate box.reset comes in handy in those instances because it enables you to, like for example, if you pause an animation halfway through, it's helpful to get basically everything back on the same page. So you reset and you set the value to 0 at the same time, and that just ensures that the animation is going to run seamlessly. It's not going to throw any errors. That's something that I've found in my experience, but different use cases may or may not require that step. But I've just put it in there because at the end of the day, there's no harm in doing it. And yeah, that's basically it. I'm probably going to do another one of these where we'll talk about, like I say, loops, starting, stopping, and also easing. Easing's a very interesting concept that enables you to kind of build sort of bounciness into the animation. So they'll spring and they'll snap and they'll twist and they'll bend, and it's really, really quite easy. It's only another few extra lines of code, but it adds so much to your applications. So I definitely want to demonstrate that to you, but I think for now I'll just leave it here. Hopefully you get something out of it. Just a few common errors that you might encounter also when you're working with animations. The first one we've already touched on, that's if you try to animate just a normal component. In order to animate anything, it needs to be an animated component. So if you just, for example, apply all of this animation to an ordinary view, you're going to get this error, which we have already encountered in this tutorial. That's a very easy fix. Literally just prefix the component name with animated, and just like that it should work. There we go. Once we refresh, here we've got one that says render error, input range 5 and output range must have the same length. This occurs if you have, see here for example with the width, we've got 5 elements in the input range array but only 4 in the output range. So you're basically telling it you want to go from A to B to C to D to E, but down here you've only got A, B, C and D. That's a very easy fix as well. You just need to ensure that the arrays are both of equal length. So if we go like that, that would resolve that issue. Another error, this hasn't thrown any error, but it's not working. If for example you wanted to do what I showed you before and you want to bypass the hooks and you just want to trigger the animation manually, This isn't working here when we hit run, and the reason is because we haven't put .start on the end. So you need to make sure you have that start command, because that's what's ultimately going to trigger the function. It doesn't matter if you've got an onPress event with the function contained inside of it, you need to have that start command. So once you add that and hit run, then that'll work. Here's another really big one. We've got another render error, element type is invalid, blah, blah, blah. The issue here is that we've tried to animate a button, and there are actually only certain components which can be animated. A problem that a lot of people run into is that they'll try and animate a pressable component or like a touchable opacity component or something like that, and it will throw a big error. There are only a select few components which can be rendered, and you can see them here in the documentation. Images, scroll views, text, view, flat list, section list. These are the only things that we can actually directly apply animations to. And that was a big problem for me at first, because I was trying to animate touchable components, like I say, and pressable components. None of it was working. I was consumed with dread momentarily, but then I realized you can just wrap those components in a view, or you can wrap the view in other components. So as long as you nest components within other components, then you can actually get around this quite easily, and it doesn't actually affect the functionality of the application at all.